All right, everybody. I should be live, but if for some reason I'm not, just let me know. And thanks for hanging out on another Monday night so we can go over some of this information, especially related to this sudden uptick in preparations for war from both sides of the equation. And when I say that, we're talking about the Pacific, so I think we all know exactly who I am referring to. Now, still waiting for everything to get started here on this live stream. Please let me know if I'm here or if I'm completely non-existent, because right now it seems like maybe I'm not even really alive. So we're going to just keep going until I know that everybody can hear and see me. This stream, for some reason, had quite a delay. So thank you all for being here. Thanks for chiming in. People are letting me know that I am here and a real person. And that's a very good thing, at least in my personal opinion. So 5x5s are coming in. Gregor Zamina, Jelly Bean Boom. We got Paper Hater, Mr. Landfill 5x5. Robert P. also says 5x5. I think we're actually here. So since that's the case, we can get started. And I do want to mention that Midway USA is the biggest supporter of the channel. Thanks to them, I can get live streams like this out when it comes to pertinent information related to preparedness. And of course, they have all the stuff you need when it comes to getting better equipped. So big thanks to Midway USA. And honestly, I really appreciate their support. It's not just me saying that because they're a sponsor. It's a good company to work with. So let's get things going. Low budget builder, good to see you, bruh. Glad you're here. So we have a lot of things happening in the Pacific just this past week. And if you're new here, we generally go over things that have happened within the past week. And if we go further back in time, it's in order to create context around the topics we're discussing. So thanks for being here. If you're new, make sure you subscribe if you think the information is important. And for the replay crew, you're awesome too. Make sure you check it in the comments section, because I always like knowing that you all come back to get the info. It really makes me feel good about it, okay? So first and foremost, let's talk about Taiwan. We're talking about the Pacific tonight specifically because we touch base on other areas of the planet when it comes to geopolitics and some of the escalations that we're currently seeing. So we might as well touch base on our, in my opinion, greatest adversary, which would be China, the PLA, okay? So this is from the Financial Times, all right? And this came out March 16th, 2024. Taiwan war game exposes vulnerability of energy grid to a China attack. Now, this conversation is going to be interesting because it's not specifically about just what Taiwan is going to be dealing with, but I want to apply the same logic to the United States if we found ourselves under attack from any outside adversary, because a lot of the same lessons can be learned here in the U.S. based on what Taiwan is concerned about when it comes to China trying to retake the country, right? Okay, so Taiwanese security experts and retired military officials close to the opposition, Kuomintang, have called for drastic reforms to make the country's energy sector less vulnerable against a Chinese attack. A war game conducted by the nonpartisan Taiwan Center for Security Studies think tank found that energy reserves, the electricity grid, storage facilities, and crisis planning fell far short of securing even basic power supplies in case of a blockade or missile attack by Beijing. China claims Taiwan is part of its territory and has, over the past few years, stepped up military intimidation, economic coercion, and efforts to enforce diplomatic isolation to force the island to acquiesce to unification. As part of efforts to strengthen the country's defenses, the Democratic Progressive Party government has focused on making the economy, including the energy sector, technology supply chains, and communications infrastructure, more resilient. But participants said the war game, Taiwan's first such public exercise to focus on civilian infrastructure, with 180 participants, including foreign academics, highlighted several policy shortcomings. We have power supply shortfalls even now, not to mention in wartime, said Liang Chi-yan, professor at the Research Center for Taiwan Economic Development at National Central University, who led discussions on energy resilience during the two-day tabletop exercise this week. Liang said, only by reversing plans to phase out nuclear energy by 2025 could Taiwan retain at least some backup capacity in case fossil fuel supplies were cut off. Now, this is where I want you to start applying some of these concepts to the United States of America. If we were to find ourselves in a hot conflict with a global superpower like China, how would we do when it comes to energy? Are we at full capacity right now. In some places, we've surpassed capacity, right? We know, especially in densely populated areas like California, they have to limit people's energy consumption during times of high usage because they really just can't actually sustain it. So if that's the case, and in normal times we can't even actually ensure everyone has access to power, what do you think it would look like during a wartime scenario? And this is also why our infrastructure is so vulnerable, because it's already at peak capacity in many ways. So disrupting it even a little bit can send it into a catastrophe, right? Let's see. Lady T Survival, have a coffee. You're appreciated. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate it, and I definitely will have a coffee. In fact, I am drinking some coffee right now. And that just makes me feel way better about the rest of the night. So keep all that in mind, because you have to learn lessons from these other countries that are experiencing some of these situations while you have the availability of peace at your disposal, because that's not something that's guaranteed, right? Coal, gas, and oil, all imported, still account for 82% of Taiwan's power generation. The KMT has long attacked the ruling DPP's ambition to simultaneously abandon nuclear power, replace coal with more natural gas, and ramp up offshore wind and solar power generation as unfeasible. Phasing out nuclear energy has been part of the DPP's core values for decades. But in a sign of flexibility, President-elect Lee Ching-te said during his election campaign that nuclear power could be considered as a backup option. So even though we all know that these renewable energy sources can't compete with nuclear, as well as anything related to coal and fossil fuels, right, which they're labeled. People are still pushing for the renewables to be priority, right? But in a wartime scenario, there's zero chance that that would actually produce enough energy for everybody to survive off of, while also trying to make up for losses in the infrastructure based on what's likely to happen during an attack. So, think about this. This is something that I thought was very interesting from this concept, okay? Under a scenario that China intercepted at least some fossil fuel shipments, Taiwan would run out of gas in a matter of weeks, participants said. They suggested re-equipping power plants to enable them to run on oil or coal, which Taiwan has bigger stockpiles of, as backup options. So it's just interesting that they know even if some of their supply was cut off, it would be over, which I think is a reasonable assumption to apply to any other country during a time of war, no matter where you are. The UK, the United States, Canada. I know we have the ability to produce our own energy and to restructure things when it comes to imports and exports, but we have to keep in mind that so many things have been done recently in order to curb our ability to really move forward in the energy production sector, that it would very much be an Achilles heel for us during a wartime scenario. Let's see, Florida Sheepdog 1, what about the new laser energy? There's a lot of laser energy. We're going to talk about that here in just a little bit. Well, maybe not laser, but we have some other stuff to talk about regarding new ways to acquire energy that is actually happening. So we're going to talk about that as well. But basically, they also, in the war game, were very aware of the fact that the infrastructure itself would be attacked and that it would hurt everybody in the country when it comes to power. Energy experts pinpointed the country's aging, highly centralized electricity grid as the other main vulnerability. Greater Taipei, with its concentration of population, industry, and communication infrastructure, relies on supplies from power plants in the center and the south of the island, but all transmission runs through three main bottlenecks. Electromagnetic or cyber attacks taking out or damaging any of the three could leave the country's capital and main industrial hubs dark, Liang said. He added that government plans to make the grid more resilient were overly focused on hardware investment. So you can see that Taiwan's very aware, if they were to be attacked, that their power is going down. They're going to try to make it as resilient as they can in the meantime, but we know these things take a lot of time. And there's reason to believe China's not going to wait around much longer because of things that are happening in China as well as in the United States right this second. And that's something that we're going to talk about here in just a second. But this war game was very interesting because not only did it show that Taiwan's very vulnerable to a grid-style attack in the sense of hurting their infrastructure and shutting down their power, but it also lets you conceptually think about the idea of it happening here in the United States. And if we're already in a shortage of energy, what would it look like in a wartime scenario, right? And I think we've seen how states like California, especially with their energy companies, PG&E comes to mind, where they will limit your power consumption whether you like it or not. And I can definitely see a lot of that happening, just like in World War II, with rations being applied to things like fuel and tires and certain types of food and everything else back then. In this modern day and age, it's going to be consumption. Whether or not that's power or bandwidth, right? It could be a lot of different things. Cellular data, they're gonna have to lock stuff down and ration it out because that's how wartime works. So let's move on from there. And this is just getting started. We're going to talk about a lot tonight when it comes to some of these escalations and some of these preparations that are being put into place right now. But as we go through this conversation, you'll see why there's a good reason to believe that something's going to happen in that region by the end of this year, most likely, okay? Let's see here. I guess I didn't see the actual article with my own eyes. Some of you are total sheep, said Hugh Junnett. I don't know what you're talking about, but I'm just going to go ahead and say you're probably right. So, all right, Nick says a third of this donation will go to the government. Yeah, well, welcome to any society that has a government, right? And unfortunately, although the idea of not having a government sounds great when you are just a normal person who wants to be left alone and enjoy your peace and privacy, we need government of some kind or else things get dangerous very quickly, right? We all know that. So it's a very unfortunate necessity. Now, let's talk about what China's doing right now, which has to do a lot with what Taiwan was just concerned about and how they are putting the pedal to the metal regarding this. Okay, so this is from Bloomberg from March 15th this year. All right, China's nuclear energy expansion is getting even faster. Beijing's rapid deployment of atomic power rivals its growth in solar and wind, and the round-the-clock electricity is more beneficial for the grid. Okay, now this is wartime preparations, whether or not you want to see it that way. It would look like just standard infrastructure investments and economic growth and everything else related to why having unlimited power would be so beneficial. But in reality, what Taiwan was just complaining about is what China is trying to solve before they find themselves in a hot conflict. Because if they can produce power at home without any import requirements of any kind and actually sustain the grid for their population, then they can be isolated if needed, right? And this is something that we are struggling with right now in the US. If they can surpass us, it's going to benefit them in any type of conflict of attrition. So, countries trying to replicate China's boom in renewable electricity might also want to take a page out of its nuclear power playbook. Beijing is able to approve as many as 10 new reactors a year, the chairman of China National Nuclear Corps said last week, which would accelerate an already impressive expansion of atomic energy. The nation has 36 reactors under development and is expected to leapfrog France and the United States to become the world's largest source of nuclear power by the end of the decade, according to Bloomberg NEF. The country's breakneck pace of additions has, however, been largely overshadowed by its rapid adoption of solar and wind. Those technologies come with the drawback of only producing electricity at certain times of the day, and China's grids are already straining to deal with the intermittent generation without more energy storage. Many countries are trying to copy China's success in renewables, including India and the United States, which are both attempting to set up their own solar supply chains to minimize reliance on a geopolitical foe. But fewer are going nuclear. Only 16 nations are currently building reactors, and China accounts for nearly half the plants under construction, according to the World Nuclear Association. High costs, long planning times, and safety concerns are among reasons why the technology isn't more popular elsewhere. But Beijing's success with nuclear power does offer some lessons for governments considering it. China is able to build reactors at a fraction of the cost of places like France and the US, according to Bloomberg NEF. That's in part thanks to low lending rates from supportive state-owned banks. Oh, the state wants to build these nuclear power plants? I can't imagine why. It's also because of smart construction strategies. China prioritizes building several reactors of the same design, which allows the development of a skilled workforce and a ready supply chain, reducing the time and money needed. Following simple lessons like these can reduce the cost of atomic energy and create another more reliable alternative to planet-warming fossil fuels, which you'll hear a little bit about that here as we talk about energy, of course, because a lot of these news outlets are very concerned with the climate in that regard. But this should tell you something. China's not just building a crap ton of nuclear reactors because they just want to have more power accessible to their people. This is preparations for war. This is so that if they have to lock down and go isolation mode, they can without worrying about whether or not they can produce the power required to fight a fifth generation conflict with a near-peer adversary. And they're surpassing us, they're surpassing France, they're surpassing the entire planet when it comes to nuclear power production. And if they can get enough power or nuclear reactors and power plants online, they will be able to have unlimited energy in some ways, right? So this is not just face value, oh, they need more power, so they're building reactors. They're doing it at this breakneck pace for a reason. There would generally not be much of a rush to just build nuclear reactors and nuclear power plants unless you felt like you were going to need them relatively soon. And they are building them very quickly. So that should tell you something, right? And if you're not connecting the dots with these different motivations, then it could be easily written off as just business as usual. But I think we might be onto something here in the United States as well for a lot of the same reasons. Bees nuts, I am not running for office, but I appreciate the support. I really do. You know, maybe one day when I am more masochistic, I will get involved in politics, okay? You know, I got to get a little bit more situated where I live because I'm an outsider. I don't want to just jump in and start making decisions, right? You know, I got to get more involved with the community first, which is very important for all of you, by the way. Now, the U.S. seems to have a response to this. There could be some, I don't know, concerns here, but this is something that's being developed right now in the US, and it's something that you should be aware of, but we're also getting investments from foreign countries like Saudi Arabia. So, but you got to have the money to do this, and of course in the US, it's all about the private sector when it comes to energy, whereas in China, like they said, they were being funded by the state. So it gives you a different level of motivation and investment, but at the same time, this is what we probably need in order to stay somewhat relevant in the terms of power, okay? Just watch us. Gates-backed TerraPower is bullish on being the first next-gen nuclear plant in the U.S. Now, this is another story about nuclear power that's being developed in a new fashion. They're trying to develop new ways to make it more modular and smaller and still easily productive, right? But they're also in quite a rush. And I would have to say it's probably for the same reason as China, okay? Inside TerraPower's, oh, and by the way, this article is from March 14th from GeekWire, okay? Inside TerraPower's cavernous 65,000 square foot laboratory north of Seattle, by the way, cavernous is a euphemism for underground, right? There's a suite of stations for experimenting with new materials and cutting-edge methods for generating nuclear power. One area is dominated by a 2-story silver tower where engineers test the flow of liquid over mock reactor fuel rods. An enclosed space nearby features a network of insulated pipes that bear a vague resemblance to an oversized hamster habit trail, but in fact are used to study heat transfer between melted salts and metal. Inside an oxygen-free sealed glove box, molten sodium spins in a glass beaker. The engineers here are fine-tuning the technology needed for building small modular nuclear reactors, a design that aims to be cheaper and faster to construct than traditional reactors and that can help save the planet from the ruinous impacts of climate change. TerraPower is among a slate of U.S. companies developing the downsized reactors, but other lead competitors or contenders have recently stumbled in their pursuits, and now the Bill Gates-backed venture is in a strong position to be the first to deploy the next-generation technology in America. This month, the company expects to submit to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission an application for the certification of its Natrium reactor, which it developed with GE Hitachi Nuclear Energy. This spring, it's scheduled to break ground on a demonstration power plant located near a soon-to-be-retired coal power plant in Kemmerer, Wyoming. Looking further ahead, the company is exploring a potential deal with the United Arab Emirates that could lead to the purchase of hundreds of reactors. "We're just doing it," said Chris Levesque, TerraPower's CEO and president. "We've got the private investment. We have the government investment." Okay, key word there. "We bought the land. Yes, we'll need permission from the NRC, but we are definitely in a mode this year of just watch us." Okay? The company has raised about $1 billion, including investments from Gates as well as South Korea-based SK Incorporated and SK Innovation, according to PitchBook. It has additionally been awarded roughly $2 billion from the U.S. Department of Energy. Which, by the way, pretty sure manages our nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Okay? The need for nuclear is urgent, suddenly. The world is on course to get dangerously hot, and nuclear power is expected to play an essential role in tempering climate change. It can provide a carbon-free energy source 24/7, complementing the intermittent power coming from wind and solar. And demand keeps rising as the use of artificial intelligence and large language models expands, requiring more power-guzzling computing. So, we're full speed ahead as well on nuclear power. Now, listen, the climate stuff could be, at least in my opinion, a way to mask a lot of things from the government, right? I think a lot of us know that already. Like, climate can be used and leveraged as a way to implement new restrictions or new policies or new regulations, right? And they can also be blamed for things that are actually being developed for alternative reasons, aka defensive strategies based on a rising expectation of war with a near-peer adversary like China, right? China's in a rush to build nuclear reactors. They're going to have more than the US and France by the end of this decade, which means by 2030, not very far away. And suddenly, the US government, the US Department of Energy, is investing $2 billion in this company to develop new, more modular and smaller ways to develop nuclear power, which would make you, I guess, assume they're looking for ways to deploy it in places that you usually want to be able to build a full-scale nuclear power plant. So these are all considerations to make. And I know that this isn't as interesting for some when it comes to war preparations. People want to hear about naval ships, and they want to hear about artillery, and they want to hear about tanks, and they want to hear about troop deployments, and they want to hear about weapons and all that stuff, which we're going to talk about some of that too, don't worry. But energy and infrastructure is logistics, right? Which wins wars. That's the saying, right? So if you're not looking at some of this stuff from the perspective of preparations for war, it could easily just look like, oh, countries need more power, they're building power plants. But I do find it very interesting that this week is what those stories are all from. We have Taiwan saying, well, in a war, we're not going to have enough power. We have China going full speed ahead on nuclear power, and we have the US investing billions of dollars in these companies developing new methods of nuclear power generation. It doesn't seem very coincidental to me. Let's see here. South Florida DCL, about time for a haircut. A lot of people have been saying that. I've even been saying that. But it's just hard once you get to this point. It's like, yeah, I could cut it all off, make my life a lot easier and a little bit more practical, but I also have wizard hair, and I don't want to lose any of my powers. So I'm just a little bit conflicted, you know? And it's like that story in the Bible about Samson. Like, I might need to pull a temple down or something. You never know. Anyway, let's move forward before I get, caught with not having enough biblical knowledge to even represent that story well. Let's talk about actual troop deployments. There you go. We finally made it. I wasn't holding it from you, I promise, okay? Okay, this is from March 12th. This is from the Asia Times. So we're getting the other perspective here, not just the United States perspective or the Western media, right? We have to kind of jump around, which is something we do here on this channel. We get a lot of different perspectives from different media outlets in order to try to cover our bases and develop the most well-rounded opinion that we can. So if you're new here and you like that, hit the like button because I'm supposed to say those kinds of things sometimes. And I'm really bad at it, but I appreciate you doing it. Okay, U.S. Green Berets deploying to Taiwan's front line. U.S. Special Forces now permanently assigned to train Taiwanese troops on islands just 10 kilometers from mainland China, okay? U.S. Special Forces operations Special Operations Forces, they have those too, by the way, have been permanently assigned to Taiwan's frontline islands, preparing elite Taiwanese units for possible island defense and guerrilla warfare operations against a Chinese invasion. This month, SOFREP reported that U.S. Army SOFs have been deployed to Taiwan for ongoing training under the 2023 NDAA, or National Defense Authorization Act. U.S. troops on Kinmen will be situated just 10 kilometers from mainland China. And this is provoking in many ways, okay? SOFREP states that the U.S. military advisors will take permanent positions at the Taiwanese Army's amphibious command centers in Kinmen and Penghu. conducting regular training exercises alongside Taiwan's elite forces. The collaboration includes training Taiwanese counterparts to use the Black Hornet Nano, a compact military unmanned aerial vehicle, and creating operational guidelines and training manuals for the drone. The Taiwanese Aviation and Special Forces Command has proposed acquiring the drone directly from the U.S. through military sales avenues. Okay, does that sound familiar at all? Us supplying military equipment and training to another country's forces? Seems like something that's been happening quite a bit lately. SOFREP states that NDAA outlines a framework for deploying U.S. personnel to Taiwan, focusing mainly on military training without immediate plans to station civilian U.S. officials. It mentions that reports indicate a growing presence of the U.S. Special Operations Forces liaison element in Taiwan, the SOFLE, with plans to station small teams from the 1st Special Forces Group's 2nd Battalion, Alpha Company, and on the self-governing island. It says that these military teams, composed of 3 U.S. Army Green Berets, will conduct joint training missions at Taiwan's 101st Amphibious Reconnaissance Battalion and Airborne Special Service Company. SOFREP mentions that the Taiwanese Ministry of National Defense has emphasized the goal of these exchanges is to bolster Taiwan's training, readiness, and institutional capabilities, which it says aligns with annual plans to ensure national and regional security. Taiwan's frontline islands of Kinmen and Penghu are critical for its defense, with SOFs playing a vital role in a protracted island defense strategy. Now, look at this map. This is Kinmen, right here. 6 miles from mainland China. Like, a well-trained swimmer could swim from that island to China. Okay? Here's the thing I want you to keep in mind. China considers Taiwan its territory. It does not think of it as sovereign land. China is Taiwan in China's mind. Okay? And if that's the case, we have U.S. military assets permanently stationed in China, trading what China sees as an insurgent force in guerrilla warfare. And that's what we're doing. And we're very, very close to China. If China had troops at the Mexican border, 6 miles from the border, and they were training, we know they work with the drug cartels, but let's say they're training an insurgent force that was worried about attacking America. Do you think that we would just be like, oh, well, they are 6 miles away? But in reality, that's not even the right analogy. This is more like if China was training troops on Rhode Island how to attack America, or how to defend Rhode Island from America coming in to say, hey, get off this island. You can't be doing that, right? Like, I don't know how to actually make it into a good analogy, because it's so preposterous if you were to look at it through that perspective. But that's exactly what's happening, okay? So this goes through about how those islands are necessary for any type of military action in that region. If China was to reincorporate Taiwan, they'd have to go through those islands, and those islands are well suitified and well fortified for any type of defense strategy. So it's very interesting, but it's not a lot of information that's really relevant to what we need to know. But what this should tell you is that there is a higher chance that something can go wrong over there based on the fact that we're stationed right there. We're in their backyard. Like if their backyard was literally in a suburban neighborhood, right? And they're inside their house wondering why we're in their backyard. So I'm not saying what we're doing is wrong. I understand that Taiwan is asking for our assistance and that we have vested interest into why we would want them to maintain their sovereign status. Like something to do with, semiconductors. But at the same time, in China's view, we are in their country, training this force that's wanting to fight China, right? Or will fight back if China comes in to establish law and order, which is what, in their opinion, they'd be doing. So it's just not a very good situation, okay? Yeah, we've got Florida Keys, says Crazy Joe. Exactly. It'd be like them being in the Florida Keys training Cubans on an island, on one of the keys there, and then us saying, hold on, you can't be doing this here, and then we go in with the military, to stop it, and then they start fighting back to be like, no, you can't take our island, right? I mean, I don't know what else to call it. Viv B, Chinese sleeper cells are already in the USA. Yes, they are in many ways, but they're not just like what you think of when it comes to a sleeper cell, right? We think of these like guys in, kind of like operative gear or, in disguises that are living in these underground facilities or these specialized technological centers of data and network communications and whatnot. But in reality, they're running marijuana farms. They're running illicit operations. They're running different criminal activities. And then when the time comes, the state still has control over those people. So they're going to be able to use them for whatever they want at that point. So it's a little bit different than what we think of when we think of the term sleeper cell. It's not quite the same when it's already out in the open, but it's not operating as a sleeper cell currently. It has ways to be financially profitable in the meantime, right? So let's see here. Let's go ahead and talk about what we're doing that's also proving that we're preparing for war. So not only do we have Green Berets and other military assets stationed permanently now in Taiwan on an island that's 6 miles from China. I don't know what else to say. Like it's just not going to work for China long term. It's just not. One day they're going to be like, nah. So, and like that's just my opinion, but I would hope we would too. If China was 6 miles off our coast, building up a military force and training people in order to eventually have a conflict with us, I would hope our military would go to that island and just be like, nah. So, I mean, I don't expect them to act any differently, right? Okay. Newsweek, March 14th. Pentagon plans sea drone fleet for possible China war. We're preparing for war with China. Like this is happening. And there's reasons to believe it's happening this year, in my opinion, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Okay, the Pentagon is embarking on a $1 billion program to build an armada of remote-controlled killer sea drones. The effort is the first phase of the U.S. Department of Defense's Replicator initiative to build thousands of autonomous, war-ready vehicles as tools to deter conflict and, if deterrence fails, to fight and win the war, Deputy Defense Secretary Kathleen Hicks said last month. The announcement comes amid concerns in Washington, D.C. over a potential future attack against Taiwan by China, which the DoD considers a pacing challenge. Like I said, outpacing us in nuclear reactor production, it's not the only thing that is happening here. The U.S. is the self-ruled island's main arms supplier, but it maintains a long-standing policy of strategic ambiguity to keep China guessing on whether Washington would commit American forces to Taiwan's defense. Hicks said Monday that the department will ask lawmakers to allocate $500 million for Replicator this fiscal year, possibly as a reprogramming request, and another $500 million in the budget the DoD has submitted for fiscal year 2025. U.S. Naval Institute News reported. Okay. In addition to the sea-skimming drones, the DoD's Defense Initiative Unit is working on software to enable swarms of surface and airborne drones to seek out targets on their own, with the decision to attack resting with human coordinators. For now, Chinese military buildup and exercises around Taiwan are nearing the point at which they could execute a profound military operation. With little notice, Admiral Samuel Paparo, whom the Senate recently confirmed as the next chief of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, said last month. He said China's rapidly expanding capabilities are a call to action for Washington, and that the capacity to field a large number of unmanned aircraft in waters where the People's Liberation Army has an offensive and sensory edge will be key to potentially defending Taiwan in a future conflict. Okay? China considers Taiwan a rogue province and has pledged to someday bring it into the fold through force if necessary, though the Chinese Communist Party government in Beijing has never ruled there. Taiwan aims to develop its own fleet of naval drones with an eye toward countering an amphibious assault across the 90-mile-wide Taiwan Strait, which, by the way, we just talked about the fact that they're actually getting drones from us. So, just throwing that out there. Local media reported earlier this month that state-owned weapons developer National Chung-Shan Institute of Science and Technology has been contracted to produce prototype sea drones with plans to assess over 200 units. Okay, so, and a big takeaway from this is that these drones are autonomous. This is AI. They're only going to have control whether or not to attack. And it's hard for me to believe that we really are going to have all the firewalls in place to ensure that that remains the capability, right? And we know that they're developing drones right now that are AI driven that won't need anyone to say whether or not to attack. And they're actually using those in Ukraine right this second, where they're building out AI drones that go in and then they attack if they identify that their target is in fact an enemy target. And they're leaving it up to the drone because it allows for it to have further travel distance without any need for line of sight or anything else. And there's no operator error, supposedly, right? And this is the future of warfare. I mean, this is where we're heading, okay? Now, underwater sea drones, like we're doing it. $1 billion says so. So do you think we're preparing for war with China, or do you just think we're interested to see how underwater sea drones work out? All right. Gen X Gemini, it's okay to do your job tonight. I appreciate you coming back on the replay, though. I will be very happy to see you there, okay? Now, let's get into another way that China is preparing for this war that would, in my opinion, most likely apply here in the United States too. And if that's the case, well, prepare to have some interesting time in jail, possibly. What do I mean by that? Well, let's jump right into it. Okay. This is from Radio Free Asia. Chinese arrests jumped nearly 50% amid clampdown on hostile foreign forces. Okay, this is from March 11th. Authorities in Beijing and Hong Kong go after infiltration, sabotage, incitement, and separatism. This is what an authoritarian regime does prior to a war. Why? Because they can't risk instability within the country if they're facing a near-peer adversary outside of it. They're going to lock down any dissent, and they're going to mitigate the risk of internal conflict that takes away from their ability to invest on their military front. I mean, that's just kind of standard operating procedure for authoritarian regimes. But this is what China is doing right now. So this should tell you something because it's gone up 50%. Why are they so adamant about it right now? Okay. Chinese authorities arrested 726,000 people last year, a jump of 47.1% from the previous year. The country's chief prosecutor told the National People's Congress that ended Monday amid a crackdown on crimes linked to hostile foreign forces. So this isn't just, petty crimes or theft or anything that we think about here in the U.S. when it comes to crime. These are crimes that they're considering regarding hostile foreign forces, which is something you would be concerned about if you thought war was very likely. Authorities also formally prosecuted 1.688 million people last year, up 17.3%, Chief Prosecutor Ying Yang said. Yang said more than 2.4 million people were arrested or prosecuted last year for offenses related to national security, although he didn't provide a breakdown for each category. The Chinese authorities have typically employed a highly elastic definition of what constitutes a state secret. And national security charges are frequently leveled at journalists, rights lawyers, and activists, often based on material they posted online. Ying's annual work report on behalf of the Supreme People's Procuratorate, and I'm like, whoa, said the focus of last year's Strike Hard campaign was crimes linked to hostile foreign forces, including infiltration, sabotage, incitement, and separatism. The ruling Communist Party blames hostile foreign forces for the white paper protests that spread across the country in November 2022 as people vented their anger and frustration, holding up blank sheets of paper as a symbol of what they can't say about Xi Jinping's 3-year-long zero COVID policy. It also claims that foreign forces were behind waves of mass popular protests in Hong Kong against national security legislation, patriotic education, and extradition to mainland China in recent years. Okay? Social unrest. Cheng Jiaofeng, a former police detective from the Zhuzhou Municipal Police Department in the central province of Hunan, said the rise in arrests is likely linked to growing social unrest. 2024 is the year in which China is heading into a state of social unrest, Cheng told RFA Mandarin. Various social tensions are emerging one after the other. The official crime data tells us that people are having a hard time and is a true reflection of the state of society, he said. Liu Zhen, who founded the Beijing-based health nonprofit Yiring Ping, agreed. The explosion of these numbers is either due to a rise in social resistance during the past year, or it's due to the Communist Party itself, which may be acting to maintain stability, catch spies, to ward off a crisis. He said he knows of many volunteers in the nonprofit sector who have been detained and even sentenced during the past year. If they're like this in the public welfare sector, then it's even more likely in other fields, he said. Of course, legally speaking, it's total nonsense. By the way, that guy's probably going to jail. The nationwide obsession with hostile foreign forces is being seen in Hong Kong too, where the authorities are getting ready to pass another law safeguarding national security that provides for harsher penalties when foreign forces are deemed to have been involved. Currently, pro-democracy media mogul Jimmy Lai is on trial for collusion with foreign forces under the 2020 National Security Law. The case against him relies heavily on opinion articles published in Lai's now defunct Apple Daily newspaper. Okay, so listen, all of this is a preparation. They know the social unrest is here. And even like this article said, 2024 is the year in which China is heading into a state of social unrest. They're going to lock everything down. They're going to stamp out any dissent. And then they can move forward more easily with their plans. And just like 2024 is a year of a state of social unrest, which China can't accept or sustain based on the fact that they have such a huge population, we're also putting $1 billion into underwater autonomous sea drones in order to stop China from invading Taiwan. So timing-wise, everything is leading up to this year being a pretty pivotal point for China. I don't know for a fact if they're going to attack or try to reincorporate Taiwan this year. But what I can say is that there's a lot of evidence that it would make sense for them to do something before they can't. So before societal unrest becomes too great, before underwater sea drones are an option for Taiwan, before our forces are deployed on these islands 6 miles from the coast and able to fully train and fortify said islands and forces in order to get them ready for a possible reincorporation. All of these things are pushing the timeline down further and further. Plus, we also have to keep in mind that we have an election this year and that there will be a different power dynamic depending on who would win said election. And China knows that. China knows that there's the wild card in the alternate party right now, which could change the way things are dealt with. China might want to roll the dice with what they're currently dealing with because it's better to have the enemy you know, right? And although they have experience with the last guy, they know exactly how this guy is going to react and how he does things. So, keep that in mind. But with all these things coming into place, it's very hard to see China just not doing anything before the end of this year. At least in my opinion, based on everything we just talked about. I mean, Taiwan's trying to make their grid more resilient. They're trying to make it so their power plants are no longer reliant on fossil fuels, where they import almost all of their energy. And China could easily disrupt that. And China knows that. Is China going to wait until they don't have to worry as much about that disruption? These are all things that you should be asking yourself, okay? Now, let's see. Bobby C., I don't know if anyone has told you yet, but you look like Steve Buscemi saying hello to his fellow youths. I love that, actually. What does he say? Hello, fellow kids, right? I don't remember the exact line, but I love that. Thank you so much. Hey, MP Army, says Granite State Man. Well, good to see you too. I don't know if this is an army per se, but I think that we have a pretty solid community that could probably, take care of itself in a fight if it had to. So we like that you're here, okay? Let's see. 1313 Cloverfield Lane, says the Watchman. Well, you know what? If China released some kind of gigantic monster on the U.S., I wouldn't even be surprised at this point. How are you going to pin it down? Where did it come from? We don't know, right? So, no, it's just because I literally lost the word for gigantic monster from the ocean, which I should just know, right? But it's fine. Those words don't have to come to mind anytime soon. What about other stuff happening that China could get involved in, by the way? And with all the talk about NATO getting involved in the Ukraine conflict, what about China? Well, this was something that was just recently said that you should probably be aware of, okay? Okay, it's from March. Not May. We're not there yet. I wish we were because the weather would be much nicer here. March 17th. So that would be yesterday. Well, I mean, any day if you're not here tonight, if you're a replay crew, but yesterday if you're here tonight. Okay? So, Kaiju, thank you for helping me out with that. Everyone's like, Kaiju, you idiot. Yeah. Godzilla, sure, but Kaiju was the word I was looking for. I do like the word Kraken too, Tim Nelson. Thanks for that as well. Okay, China ready to intervene if America and NATO attack Russia. It doesn't say and, but it feels like it needs to say and, right? Okay, a representative of China's Ministry of Defense reportedly stated on Saturday that Beijing is ready to intervene if the United States or North Atlantic Treaty Organization decides to attack Russia. The development takes place against the backdrop of Sweden's official entry into NATO, marking a turning point for both the hitherto neutral nation and the Intergovernmental Military Alliance. NATO and Kremlin have been at odds since. Okay. Also, by the way, in case you just didn't know, which I'm sure most of you do, but if you weren't aware, Putin did win his re-election bid. So he is the president of Russia now again for, I believe, 6 years. So there you go. And guess what? When you get elected in again, you don't have to worry about getting reelected for 6 years. Well, you can start doing things. Keep that in mind, okay? All right, here we go. All you need to know about China's intervene claims. According to Telegram channel WW3 Info Battlefield Research, China is ready to intervene militarily anywhere if the US or NATO decides to attack Russia. Moreover, Russian President Vladimir Putin earlier this week cautioned the West and NATO that Moscow is prepared for nuclear war and would view any U.S. troop deployment to Ukraine as an escalation. From a military technical point of view, we are, of course, ready, stated Putin, while noting that he doesn't see a need for it currently. Okay? Separate reports this week also claimed that Putin had told his government officials that space projects, including setting up a nuclear power unit, should be a priority for the Kremlin. Russia has good competencies and moreover even has such reserves that we can be proud of, which we can count on in the future, the Russian president said during a meeting with government members. They want to build a nuclear power plant in space. So everyone wants more nuclear power, and I can get it. And Russia's taking it to the next level saying, well, let's go to space with it, okay? So, oh, and by the way, Yuri Borisov, the head of Russia's space agency Roscosmos, disclosed earlier this month that Moscow and Beijing are working on a project to place a nuclear reactor on the moon between 2033 and 2035. Notably, Russia's Roscosmos and the China National Space Administration also penned a memorandum on their government's behalf in 2021 to cooperate in building an international lunar research station. Okay? It's not just China. China's big. They're building space nuclear reactors with Russia. Energy is the new logistics war. We always knew that, but understand that at this day and age, like we talked about earlier tonight, you need an extremely high amount of power in order to use these quantum supercomputers and actually process all of this artificial intelligence that everybody's trying to utilize for war. And when AI becomes a priority for warfare, the necessity of that consumption is going to grow. So just keep all of that in mind, but we are heading in a direction where that is going to be extremely important, which is why you should also consider the grid to be a very vulnerable and likely target. Take somebody's power out, they no longer have supercomputing function, right? Just think about that when it comes to the way things are moving forward, okay? Russia's a beautiful place with discipline, USA not so much, as Billy the Kid Norwood. Well, that's what we have seen, right? In certain places. I try to keep that in mind when it comes to some of this information and some of these things that are shown to us, because it might be true, but it also might not be, because unless I've seen it with my own eyes, it's hard for me to say that without any reserves, right? And it's kind of like, it's easy to watch the news right now and say, San Francisco is the grossest place on the planet, right? Which, I'm not going to lie to you, in many ways it probably is. But if you go there, you'll still find places that aren't what you're seeing on the news. So you just have to always keep that in mind, right? Like it's hard to be sure of anything these days when it comes to the media and what they're portraying, all right? Hello from New Mexico, Big Chase. Well, hello to you as well from North Dakota, which is where I live, by the way, in case you're new here and you weren't aware. I like to freeze, apparently. Now, let's jump about some other stuff happening in the Pacific, which shows preparation for war. Oh yeah, remember that one war that never actually ended? U.S. commandos loud training for the unexpected in North Korea's shadow. Okay, now this is from Reuters, and it is from March 17th, so yesterday. Well, we're not going to do that whole thing again. U.S. Special Operations troops in South Korea praised recent training where they prepared for unexpected threats at a time when global crises are more interconnected than ever, their commander said following the exercise last week. Nothing in the history of the United States should give us any faith and confidence that we know where the next threat is coming from. Brigadier General Derek Lipson of Special Operations Command, Korea said in an interview on the sidelines of joint drills. Nuclear-armed North Korea in recent years has made unprecedented strides in its weapons programs, including massive new ballistic missiles that can reach the United States and speedy new tactical missiles designed to defeat missile defense systems. I wonder where they're getting all this funding. For the first time, North Korean missiles have been fired in combat, with Russia wielding them this year against targets in Ukraine, according to U.S. officials and independent experts. And in Asia, Korea joins the South China Sea and Taiwan as flashpoints with the potential to involve the region and the world. Because of that uncertainty, Lipson is trying to inject more flexibility in decision-making into his troops' training. Not just how to shoot a rifle, as he puts it, but deciding when and where. North Korea has condemned the stepped-up joint drills as a provocative rehearsal for invasion and proof of hostile intent by Washington and its allies. Adding to this year's unpredictability are the upcoming U.S. elections, which are being closely watched around the world. Lipson said that although politics play a role in military matters, his job is to ensure his troops are ready regardless of who the president is. I think North Korea would like nothing more than senior military leaders, junior military leaders, service members, and the U.S. to be worried about the election more than they're worried about their readiness, he said. It's important to make sure that we understand our role is to be ready, not to be part of the argument. Okay? Now, I actually think that's not a terrible lesson for those of us here in the preparedness community either. As much as I know the election can have huge consequences, depending on how you want to look at it, we have to just keep getting prepared, right? Regardless of what happens politically here in this country, which in many ways is a very damaged institution, let's be honest, we're going to keep prepping the same as we always do, right? So, yes, you should be involved with your local politics especially, but you should at least be aware of what's happening nationally, politically, and whatnot. But it shouldn't change your motivation or desire to become ready. Your readiness shouldn't be based on what happens during an election. So I thought that was a good point made during this article. But the other thing to keep in mind is that North Korea is still a wild card, and we still have 30,000 plus troops stationed in South Korea, and anything can happen there at any point in time. And if we go to war with China over Taiwan, what happens to the Koreas? That's a question you should be asking yourself, because North Korea is really just a proxy of China, right? And South Korea is very vulnerable to an attack from the north because of their proximity. They share a border. That's why Russia is concerned about NATO countries that they share a border with suddenly joining up, right? Finland, Sweden, like all these countries that are very close to Russia or share a border are problematic in their eyes for the same reason. So keep that in mind, but we are training for that there as well because of the proximity to it all. Okay, K-pop can win against North Korea, says the dude. Yeah, you're probably right. In fact, in all honesty, a lot of those K-pop stars have served in the military because it's a requirement, right? Much like Elvis served back in the day. It's just like, they were doing their civic duty, and I thought that was, I'm glad he did, right? So, let's talk about another country in the Pacific that is dealing with preparations for war as well. The Philippines takes war to China's doorstep. Says U.S.-funded Batan's port near Taiwan can be used during conflict. This would be upsetting for China as well, okay? As the Philippines strengthens its defense posture in Batan's island, its Navy has announced that the planned building of a U.S.-funded port on the country's northernmost island will be used during crisis, including humanitarian and disaster relief, and war. A spokesman for the Philippine Navy in the West Philippine Sea, Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad, stated that the new port in the province would benefit Batan's residents as well as the armed forces. The Philippine Navy and the armed forces are always preparing for any eventuality across the spectrum of conflict, from peace to crisis to wartime, Trinidad told reporters at a press briefing on March 13th. The announcement comes days after Baton's governor, Mariluz Keiko, said there are plans to build a U.S.-funded civilian port on the island near the crucial channel separating the Philippines from Taiwan. The Bashi Channel, which runs between Batons and Taiwan, is a crucial choke point for ships traveling between the Western Pacific and the disputed South China Sea. China is likely to use it in case of hostilities. Okay? I think that says enough. We're building a port at a place that China would use during a conflict. Everyone's getting ready for this. Both sides. They're very aware that this is a real thing. Okay? Let's see here. Like a YMH podcast heavy segment. Try it out, says Luke B. I don't know exactly what you're talking about, but I don't mind considering it, I guess. Let's see here. So, let's talk about other ways that they're preparing for this. And I don't necessarily fully disagree, but obviously there's a bunch of BS involving all of these conversations that are currently happening. But this is something to be aware of, okay? It's from March 14th. U.S. anti-TikTok bill, escalating online censorship and preparing for war with China. There's a perspective from the World Socialist website. Am I a socialist? No. Do I look at other perspectives for information sometimes to see what people are considering regarding some of these situations? Yes. The 352 to 65 vote by the U.S. House of Representatives this week to ban or force the sale of the popular social media app TikTok by its Beijing-based owner ByteDance is an attack on the democratic rights of the American people, particularly the more than 170 million people, mainly young, who make regular use of this application. Okay? Listen, I get it for national security purposes. I also understand not wanting the government to tell me I can't do something, right? Like it's a very contentious scenario in many ways. But regardless, this is from a biased point of view from the World Socialist website. So keep that in mind. But in their mind, a lot of this is because they're preparing for war with China. It is an escalation of the long-standing campaign to censor left-wing and oppositional viewpoints on the internet. Right. Right. While whipping up anti-China sentiment to escalate trade war measures against Beijing and prepare the population for open war with the world's second largest economy. President Joe Biden gave the green light for the overwhelming bipartisan passage of the right-wing, here we go again, authoritarian bill in the nearly evenly split Republican-controlled House, when he declared last week that he would sign the ban if it was approved by Congress. It must now be approved by a vote in the Democratic-controlled Senate, a prospect that remains uncertain with the bill's current language before heading to the president's desk. Okay? Now, regardless, okay, even this socialist website understands that this is to prepare the population for open war with China. Okay? Now, they're very skewed when it comes to who's censoring who these days. Because to say that this is to censor left-wing and oppositional viewpoints on the internet is an oxymoron. I'm sorry. We don't dabble in hardcore politics here on this channel. But regardless, from a logistical, a logical standpoint, and from just taking a step back and looking at things from a bird's eye point of view, the left is not very much censored on the internet compared to the right. My videos get demonetized because I used government language from government papers, from government reports, right? My video about how cartels are setting up shop on reservations here in the United States of America was demonetized because of the language I was using. You know why? Because I was reading government reports that use that language to the T. I was not changing the words by any means. We have firearms content that constantly gets hit and everything else related to anything you talk about regarding conservatism. But there are plenty of people that you would more easily consider to be left-wing that say disparaging things about, I don't know, Christians or children or anything else you might want to think about, and they seem to be able to operate with impunity. So, look, I am not trying to cause a debate here, left versus right. I'm just trying to say, not only was that article biased, but it definitely had who's getting censored the most a little bit confused, in my opinion, and experience. But the other thing to keep in mind is that they're aware of the fact that this is a war preparation. This isn't just because, like, oh, you know, this or that. Now, check this out. And this is kind of to give you a little bit more context regarding that situation. This is from March 12th. U.S. spy chief cannot rule out that China would use TikTok to influence U.S. elections. Okay, China could use social media app TikTok to influence the 2024 U.S. elections, U.S. Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines told a House of Representatives Intelligence Committee hearing on Tuesday. Asked by Democratic Representative Raja Krishnamoorthy if China's ruling Communist Party would use TikTok to influence the elections, Haines said, "We cannot rule out that the CCP would use it." Okay. Krishnamoorthy is also the ranking Democrat on the House Select Committee on China. He and that panel's Republican chair Mike Gallagher last week introduced a bill that would give TikTok's Chinese owner about 6 months to divest the short video app used by 170 million Americans. Okay, so here's the thing. It's not really what's in this story that I wanted to bring to your attention. It's the concept here. Can't rule out that China's going to use TikTok to influence the elections. Okay, so we have a few segues here. Remember how I told you that there's some good reasons to believe China is going to do something this year, right? Based on a lot of the preparations that are being put into place. Why would you wait for them to be complete? Based on a lot of the geopolitical implications of elections and everything else. But the U.S. is already putting it out there that TikTok might actually influence this election. And that can lead to a lot of measures and regulations and restrictions, especially regarding social media, due to election interference, which we know is now a hot topic item. And we know that this concept can just be used for whatever they want to use it for now when things happen in the election cycle. If things aren't done correctly or votes aren't necessarily accounted for, or who knows what could happen, right? There's a lot of blame to be placed now. There's a scapegoat built into the pie, right? We now know that if things don't go the way they're supposed to, a lot of it could be foreign interference, which then opens the door to a possible war, which then opens the door to having to declare martial law, which then opens the door to, I don't know, making things take longer than usual. Like, there's a lot of implications here for why they're doing these things, right? And we also know it could go both ways. They ban it, right? And there's implications for that. They don't ban it, and now you have these other ones that they can choose from. So I just want you to be aware that when you hear talk like this, it could be used to influence the elections. It could be used to interfere. It takes the validity away, and it allows for there to be somewhere to place the blame when things don't function correctly, let's just say. Please keep that in mind as we move forward in this election year. They've set up the pieces for you to understand that there's a possibility things could be tampered with. And then that tampering will be blamed on our foreign adversary rather than anyone domestic, right? I don't know. I just come up with this stuff. You know, I'm some dude. Listen, hopefully this is a really good conversation for you all tonight. I try my best to give out good information, relevant information, practical information, and we don't really talk about how tomorrow's going to be the end of the world, but we do talk about things that are happening within the past week, and we also try to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to why we prepare, right? This is information to give you motivation to prepare and things that can help give you reasons for some of your preparedness plans, right? If you think World War III or war with China even is becoming more and more of a realistic possibility, well, that can actually help you decide what's more reasonable to start preparing for, right? So what should I have access to? What would I be without, right? What would I need to prepare ahead of time for in case I was to lose this access? So that's why we have these conversations, not to panic and not to cause ourselves to lose sleep. It's so that we can better strategize when it comes to preparedness, because we don't have unlimited time, energy, or money. We can only invest in so much. So you need to have information that you can use to then choose the right path for how you're going to invest yourself into preparedness, right? So that's what we do here. So if you're new to that concept or you're new to this channel, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, give me all those thumbs ups. It really helps. It really does. But at the same time, share this with someone else who might not be aware of these things. And these videos and these conversations hopefully are casual enough, but also informational or I don't know, like packed enough with information that you could share this information with somebody you know who might not necessarily understand why you're preparing or what you're prepping for or why there should be a need for preparedness, right? I feel like that could be a useful tool for those who are having a hard time getting people on board, especially in your own family or friend circles, right? So share this video with those people. Let them know that, this is the stuff we talk about, and that's why we're getting ready, because there's a lot of evidence for things to get a little bit crazy around here, okay? So if you want to be part of the live private chat tonight, make sure you hit the join button down below, become a YouTube channel member, then you can have access to the private live stream. That's right after this one. I also just put my Subscribe Star link in the live chat, which is $5 a month. It gives you exclusive access to content that's not posted on YouTube, as well as the fact that you can message me directly. There's some preparedness incentives over there, and access to the private live stream. So these are ways you can support the channel directly if that's something you feel inclined to do, which I do appreciate, and this is my way of trying to give back for that. But I just want everyone here to know, if you can't afford it or you don't want to do it, which is totally understandable and totally fine, I don't share any information that's important to your preparedness in those private live streams. They're casual conversations. They're just hanging out and chatting about this or that. And it's my way of saying thank you, but I also don't keep anything important behind a paywall. So that's kind of important to me to make sure I don't ever just hold information from whoever can't, afford some kind of membership, which these days I totally understand. But there are people who want to support the channel directly, so I try to give them a way to do that while also giving back something, right? So that's the whole point of that. So Subscribe Star is a great way to do that. Joining as a YouTube channel member is another way to do that. If you join the YouTube channel membership right now, you go to the community tab on my channel page, and it will have a link to tonight's private live stream. If you're on a Subscribe Star, it's right there on the main page of Subscribe Star as well. Anything else you guys need from me, go to magicprepper.com. Billy the Kid Norwood, thanks so much for the super sticker. I appreciate it. And besides that, that's going to be it for Magic Prepper.